Speaker is Nancy Colleton, and Nancy is going to be talking about her work at the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies and the policy issues that she sees and the legal issues and budget issues associated with environmental, making sure we have the right resources and assets for environmental collection and some of the problems that she sees in the DC area and both now and in the future. Nancy?
And Kevin, thank you so much. It's so nice to be here. As Kevin said, I work primarily in the area of earth science or earth observations, and it's just a phenomenal time to be in this field. And I often think, in terms of things like Hurricane Katrina, or just this week, what we've seen with the fires outside of LA, or the fact that we went back and digitized Nimbus satellite from the Nimbus mission from 1964 to realize that, yes, in fact, ice is shrinking in Antarctica, and that we also have seen information still. We're studying the results of Hurricane Sandy and looking at the report that came out this week by Climate Central that 11 billion gallons of sewage went into streams and canals as a result over an 8-state area as a result of the flooding related to Hurricane Sandy. And I always love, too, that when we look at environmental information or Earth observations, how it's being used on local scales. I mean, there's a story this week about the fact that probably we'll have an incredible amount of cantaloupe this year because of the droughts in the Midwest, and farmers outside of Denver are looking at planting cantaloupe instead of other crops because it's not as water intensive. Or the fact that two Dallas city council people had a bit of a tiff over West Nile, their approach to responding to West Nile virus, and they're trying to get a better hand on what this year's outbreak might look like. And so all of these topics, although they're very different, farming and flooding and trying to recover from natural disaster, these topics are always very, very different, but they all show us the fact that we need information, and we need information to manage risk and also to adapt to what may be a very difficult and changing world as related to climate change. And so with this, there are some very central or consistent things that we know. One, everybody wants more information. Isn't that correct? We want more information to manage risk. We heard this morning the talk about real estate in Florida and trillions of dollars at stake. Our U.S. coasts are insured at $9 trillion is the insured value of our U.S. coast. Yet we really don't have a coastal observing system or an ocean observing system that helps us manage that risk associated with that. And it's very difficult because as people want more and more information, they'll use whatever they can get their hands on. And even though the information we have may be the best information we have, it doesn't mean it's the right information. So as we go through this evolution with people having this demand or this greater demand for information and the fact that we're getting greater access to information, we're also going to see a rise in the kind of policy and legal issues that surround the application of Earth observations. I want to give you just one example. Again, I work very closely. I co-chair a group. It's called the Environmental Information Services Working Group under the NOAA Science Advisory Board that oversees the Weather Service. And if you remember, the Weather Channel started naming winter storms this year. Did you all see that? And it was met with a lot of criticism by the meteorological community because who is the Weather Channel to name these storms? And why are we naming winter storms? We just name hurricanes. But their research showed that their audience was interested in having more information, better designating those kinds of storms that may cause power outages that would have the same kinds of impacts that a hurricane might have on it, or a severe storm might have in another area. And so they embarked on that experiment, and it was very, very successful. But it does show you the stress between what we've done traditionally, the role of the government in naming these hurricanes, and the fact that a private sector media company said, well, we can do that. and we can get it out because our audience needs it or wants it. So I think that number one, we're going to see more stress between the public and private sectors, and there are very few policies in place that help guide what may be a competition between the two or a cooperation. In the weather area, there's what's called the partnership policy that advises the government that they should not compete with the private sector in the area of weather forecasting. You see that a lot. It came about with AccuWeather and all those other companies. But that particular policy, as much as it's a meteorological policy, it doesn't really apply to other areas of Earth observations or environmental information. So that will need to come forward. One of the big trends that we see right now as well is this idea of open environmental information services. Under this working group within NOAA Science Advisory Board that I work on, they've put forward a proposal to the administrator of NOAA to better optimize NOAA's vast resources of information. And that would happen two ways. One would be to identify and try to overcome the barriers that allow the private sector to have access to all of NOAA's vast resources. And secondly, it would set up mechanisms for symbiotic development of algorithms and possibly even instrumentation that would allow the private sector to get involved in the environmental information supply chain a little earlier than here, take this information and use it, but rather, how can we develop an algorithm that we know and engage the stakeholders in the process earlier so it helps facilitate that transition? So we're seeing that policy trend come about, and NOAA has actually embraced that proposal, and we're looking at doing some pilot programs. The third point that I would make that is, and I touched on it a little earlier, as we all need information to better manage risk, and we're talking about trillions of dollars and billions of dollars, the drought alone last summer was a $25 billion insured losses. You're going to see people wanting information products, and they're going, as I said, try to get their hands on anything that they can to use to better manage risk, to better understand what our future might look at, like in long-term forecasting. We see it in the housing industry, where they're trying to develop better houses that would withstand greater wind speeds. We're seeing it with agriculture. That's really nothing new. But again, we have to understand that most of the information that we're using is government-based information, and that information is science-based information. It was science-driven information. It's not necessarily information that was developed for economic or business decision-making. And therefore, we begin to wonder about what might some of the liabilities be if, for example, you begin to build houses to a certain standard based on a long-term trend that may not, in fact, be protecting people and property. And the last point I would make is that there's a definite need for a national strategy for Earth observations. And the Office of Science and Technology Policy has taken the first step in trying to look at, well, how would we do a national plan? However, a national plan has got to include the interest of the private sector, especially as we move into an era of uncertainty around climate change. And there have to be new mechanisms to hear from more stakeholders other than the science community in developing such a plan. So I think that you will see in future months to come that there are going to be steps taken to better engage with the private sector to develop a truly national Earth observation strategy. And with that, I'll end. And again, thank you very much for letting me be here.